As a child, I used to write crime stories for my classmates in school. I was inspired by authors like Agatha Christie and Marcus Ray. I named the characters in my stories after my classmates, and I would narrate them in class. Then I would spread clues around the school so that they could find them and possibly solve the mystery in each story or series of stories. I then asked my mom to buy them a box of chocolates if they got it right. That was a humble exercise of human creativity, and it was so successful that now I work with taxes. It is this uncanny ability to imagine things into existence, to bend reality to our whim. John Cleese once wrote that being creative is finding yourself in a funny no man's land, a place where your unconscious self gives you hints and nudges that slowly clarify new notions in your head. You've been through that process, and so have I. It's that spark of genius that is capable of transforming our lives. One of the most remarkable achievements of human creativity, at least in our lifetime, is the invention of artificial intelligence. In some ways, it's us creating a creator, or in the opinion of some, a destroyer. AI is a system designed to supercharge human capabilities, whether in scientific research, or translation, or content creation, or self-driving our cars, or making our homes smarter and more accommodating to our families. You remember that 10 years ago, everybody said that Gen Z should learn how to code, yes? In a recent conference, the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, said that programming is no longer an essential skill for success. He said that now we should all learn how to become prompt engineers, meaning we should learn how to instruct this new creator of ours on what we want it to achieve. The path it chooses to achieve it can be incomprehensible to us. What matters is the end result. Or is it? AI's interactions with us make it a prime subject for taxation. It can at the same time boost the capabilities of tax administrations and those of taxpayers. It can also change the way we tax individuals or legal entities today, and maybe it can even be taxed on its own. In this series, I, Lucas de Lima Carvalho, will explore with you the most relevant connections between taxation and AI. Our series is divided into 4 episodes. This episode focuses on general definitions, whether for tax enthusiasts looking to learn more about AI or the other way around. The next episodes will address the use of AI with tax administrations and taxpayers, the impact of AI on taxable events, and the taxability of AI itself. And in each episode, I will explore both domestic and international tax topics. Buckle up. Suppose you and I decide to create a new country. We have our people, we have our land, but now we want to build the infrastructure to make our country functional and hopefully prosperous. Now, infrastructure is a long word. What does that mean in practice? Well, we need roads, hospitals, a seaport, unless we're a landlocked country. We need a police force, firefighters, a post office, a court system, and maybe a place like that bagel shop on First Avenue. I like that. Now, how do we go about making sure that these things are provided to our people? Here are a few options. First, how about some voluntary work? Well, in some indigenous communities of Ecuador, particularly when dealing with disaster or hardship, volunteers get together in what is called a minga, a Quechua word meaning collective work. In its purest form, though the Institute of Minga has a storied past in the region, Minga is just communal work for the benefit of the community, an exercise of solidarity that relies on people's abilities to build roads, repair walls, do whatever is necessary to help others. Though laudable, it's challenging to build a country on purely voluntary work. One, you would need people to do everything a country needs to run on, and good luck finding those people and convincing them to stay in your country. 2, because they are volunteers, you have very little room to require them to work extra hours or to criticize them for subpar performance, and if you do so, you can't compel them to continue working for you. Roads, hospitals, firefighters, police, the army, all of these need to be operational, whether people are in the mood to work or not, especially considering that we are creating a new country in an existing world. If people are unhappy about the public services we provide and our way of providing them, they can just leave. What do you say we ask for donations? This reminds me of the concept of intentional communities, residential communities with a shared vision and purpose. They are at times described as utopian and are said to fail at a rate slightly higher than most startups. But some, like the Twin Oaks community in Virginia, in the US, solicits donations from interested parties to support their income-sharing, egalitarian, and nonviolent lifestyle. Donations are always welcome, but it is hard to build a country with donations alone. Some of the issues you would face are similar to those relating to voluntary work, perhaps with the difference that you're not relying so much on people's abilities, but just their assets. You might recall a video that surfaced about 5 years ago of a Dutch historian named Rutger Bregman telling people at the World Economic Forum to stop talking about quote-unquote stupid philanthropy schemes and start talking about taxes.
This is my first time at Davos, and I find it quite a bewildering experience, to be honest. I mean, 1,500 private jets have flown in here to hear Sir David Attenborough speak about, how we're wrecking the planet. And I hear people talk in the language of participation and justice and equality and transparency. But then, almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. It feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water. 10 years ago, the World Economic Forum asked the question, what must industry do to prevent a broad social backlash? The answer is very simple. Just stop talking about philanthropy and start talking about taxes. Taxes. This is not rocket science. We can talk for a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we gotta be talking about taxes. Yeah, exactly. That's it, taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
Embedded in his speech, you will find the notion that we cannot rely on people's kindness or guilt or sense of community to then hope to receive from them the money our institutions need to provide public services. Fine, we could go to the other end of the spectrum. If voluntary work and donations are not the best instruments to help us build our country, how about confiscation? Let's just confiscate everything. Cash, bank accounts, cars, computers, real estate, you name it, we're taking it. You might be thinking that this is a sort of madness that would only take place in dictatorships, but Brazilians witnessed the confiscation, or formally a blockage, of their savings accounts in the early 1990s as a desperate attempt to curb inflation. Some tax charges are tantamount to confiscation. You might recall Gérard Depardieu's departure from France in 2012 because of the French 75% tax on earnings above 1 million euros. The problem with confiscation is that at some point, you run out of wealthy people to confiscate from, and then your country just becomes incapable of offering quality public services to its residents. The French example is telling. The tax was scrapped about 2 years after it was introduced, having raised insufficient funds and having prompted wealthy individuals to leave France. So confiscation is a short-sighted idea at best, neither a realistic nor a sustainable plan for the country we're building. What about taxes? Well, what about them? In a democracy, taxes are governmental charges on income, assets, or services, established by law and respectful of taxpayers' ability to pay. As a country-building instrument, they are immediately better than voluntary work. With tax money, I don't need to rely on anyone's abilities to make sure that public services are provided to everyone. Taxes are, by definition, distinct from donations in the sense that people pay taxes because their elected representatives enacted laws imposing them. And because they were approved by the people and their revenues are supposed to serve the people, it is only natural that a functional tax system should stay away from confiscatory tendencies. But we're barely scratching the surface. Anthony Infante says that taxes act as a reflection of who we are and what we aspire to be. Tax is the premier instrument in the hands of government to ensure private participation in public affairs. It loops you into the country's means and ends, regardless of how reliant you are on the public services it provides. Want to see an example? A recurring point of political debates in the US is whether they should cancel student debt. It is estimated that forgiveness of all student loans would cost US taxpayers a whopping $1.6 trillion, which is just about the entire GDP of Australia. Put it like this, the UN recognizes 195 jurisdictions as countries in the world. Of those, only 13 had a GDP higher than $1.6 trillion in 2022. I'm not going to get into the debate of who's right and who's wrong as far as student debt cancellation is concerned. What I am going to say is that opponents of this idea will usually argue that their taxpayer dollars should not be used to pay for other people's debts, especially if they themselves either paid for theirs or never went to college. This is their opposition to the idea of having their money used for a purpose that they don't identify with. It's as if they said, we never signed up for this. So there is a connection between taxpayers and the purpose served by their taxes. A sovereign state, based on democratic rule of law, imposes taxes agreed upon by the elected representatives of the people. If there is a disconnect between the legal text and what people identify as fair, you run the risk of delegitimizing the entire system. This might seem off track, but it is actually a fundamental point of our series. Taxation of AI or of activities enabled by AI does not just fall out of the sky. It is not self-evident that all countries experimenting with AI or witnessing AI will be interested in finding ways to tax it. And this is because different countries, states, jurisdictions have different backgrounds. Their priorities are not the same. And their tax systems, the name we give to the framework of taxes in a given jurisdiction, might react differently to AI-based challenges in years to come. Two of the most well-known taxes in the world today are the income tax, which may have different names in different places, and the consumption tax, the most well-known of which is the value-added tax, or VAT, and in some countries, the goods and services tax, or GST. Broadly speaking, income taxes impose a charge on the increase to a person's economic power in a given period. In other words, if you take into account a person's earnings throughout a month or a year and deduct from them certain expenses, typically those required to produce those earnings, that positive delta is an augmentation of that person's assets, and that's what is generally labeled as taxable income. Consumption taxes are generally imposed on the purchase of goods or services. Catherine James says that a good VAT is levied on consumption, collected incrementally through all stages of the production and distribution chain, and imposed on a destination basis. It is called a VAT because it references the added value of each link of the production and distribution chain in relation to things that we purchase, like a smartphone, a wooden desk, or a bottle of wine. The last thing I want to say about the definition of taxes is that you will sometimes find weird taxes in different places. Like, there are far more taxes than just an income tax or a consumption tax out there. Brazil has a tax on foreign exchange operations. Ecuador has half of that tax, meaning just a tax on outbound foreign exchange. Then you have taxes with nice names, like the nation building tax in Sri Lanka, or the tax for an inclusive and solidary Argentina, the so-called Impuesto País. What this shows is yet another dimension of the politics of tax. In an ideal world, even within the same jurisdiction, people would agree that certain events should be taxed, and then they would be taxed via a specific law created for that purpose. But political actors might try and induce people to support a tax either because of its name, or because it allegedly leads to a fairer society, or because of its end goal. One of the most odious taxes implemented in Brazil in the late 1990s was called CPMF, a small bite out of virtually every financial transaction. After its demise in 2007, some politicians have tried to reinstitute CPMF, but feared public backlash. So one of their ideas was to rename it as the Interfederative Contribution for Health, because its resources would then be used to finance public health services. Think with me for a moment. Who in their right mind would oppose a tax that is designed to fund public health? The idea never materialized, but what it shows is that the taxes in place in a given country and the public's perception of what those taxes are, and their motivation and their purpose may not always be aligned. Moving on. Let's go back to 1996. This was the year in which Deep Blue, a supercomputer developed by IBM, played 6 chess games against chess champion Garry Kasparov. Kasparov won 4 out of the 6 games. He would later lose a rematch against Deep Blue in 1997 by 2.5 wins against 3.5. Now, the principal designer of Deep Blue at IBM says in his book that Deep Blue is not intelligent, but in an essay written for Time magazine, Kasparov said that it was his first glimpse of AI. In Game 1 of the first 6, which was won by Deep Blue, Kasparov said that he got lost after the computer offered a pawn for an easy capture, what he called an extremely human move. Kasparov found Deep Blue to be very materialistic and extremely inflexible, displaying what he called a weird kind of intelligence. I want to start with this because it says something about the sort of intelligence we humans need to identify machines before we're able to call them artificially intelligent, or AI. There's a very popular TV show in the UK called Would I Lie to You, in which 2 teams of contestants, often comedians, say things for the other team to guess whether they're the truth or lies. In one of the shows, they are chatting about coffee and milk versus milk and coffee, to which one guy, Lee Mack, great comedian, says that they're the same. David Mitchell, another great comedian and writer, then disagrees and says that there's a distinction between the two. When asked what that distinction is, he replied, "Well, it's like the distinction between having a glass of water and going swimming." When everybody reacted with a mixture of bewilderment and laughter, he added, "In one case, you're putting water into yourself, and in the other case, you're putting yourself in water." This is a clear display of intelligence, but why? Well, think of what you might have answered if someone asked you to justify why there's a difference between putting milk in coffee and coffee in milk. You could say that there should be a difference in taste depending on what's more prevalent in the cup, milk or coffee. Instead of answering this, which brings to our minds the notion of nuance and proportion, Mitchell compared it to 2 things that are seemingly worlds apart. Conjure in your head the image of someone having a glass of water and the image of that same person diving into a pool. No one would say that they're similar, but Mitchell explains how their difference is akin to the difference between coffee and milk and coffee. It's just changing the perspective from that of 2 substances to 1 substance and you. The reason we identify this as intelligence is that it reinterprets things we know and opens our heads for new ideas. From an input familiar to us, it produced an output that we didn't expect. But not only that, one that positively surprised us. We would even call it intelligent behavior if Mitchell had provided the simpler answer of depends what's most prevalent in the mix. But it wouldn't have surprised us. And some could argue that depending on the level of guidance provided and the simplicity of the answer, it is just a matter of learning, not of intelligence per se. While you think about that, let's go to a textbook definition of what AI is. Michael Halen and Andres Kaplan define AI as a system's ability to interpret external data correctly, to learn from such data, and to use those learnings to achieve specific goals through flexible adaptation. Remember what Kasparov said about Deep Blue's inflexibility? In this series, we will highlight a few AI platforms that are used by many people today, and their hallmark is flexibility, or at least unpredictability, given the input that they received. Notice also that Halen and Kaplan's definition separates AI from machine learning. Think of it this way, you would not be impressed if your car self-drove a straight line with no obstacles from point A to point B. If you call that AI, it would be the equivalent of saying a combine harvester that covers an entire field following pre-programmed routes after a push of a button is AI. You might be impressed though if your car self-drives from a school in São Paulo to a poorly described destination in Santos during rush hour and arrives at the correct place following the little and perhaps confusing guidance that you provided, having dodged all sorts of obstacles along the way. Again, input and output. Those are the guideposts we're using to figure out what to call the machine in front of us. The backbone of many AI systems today is what we call neural networks, which are structures inspired by the human brain with interconnected nodes that process information. They're used for facial recognition, image classification, and fraud detection, identifying patterns in available data, and learning from results. It might remind you of another IBM project titled Watson, which defeated 2 champions of Jeopardy, the popular American quiz show, back in 2011. The magic of Watson was natural language processing, or NLP. It was able to understand the answers in Jeopardy, figure out their play on words or their subtleties, cues, and then respond with the right question, because in Jeopardy, you answer with a question. NLP is actually a good segue into the sort of thing we currently identify as AI, specifically the type of generative AI based on large language models, or LLMs. LLMs are structured on vast neural networks that are trained on enormous datasets, usually text, but not only text, coming from different sources on the web. As LLMs are trained, they capture linguistic frameworks, semantics, and nuance. That is what enables the ChatGPTs of this world, or the Perplexities, or the Geminis, to understand you and communicate with you. By the time we're making this series, we're witnessing the emergence of yet another type of model, namely the large action model. The key difference between LLMs and LAMs is that LAMs understand the nuances of your commands, whether it is to book a trip or order a meal or prepare a presentation and then do it for you. This is the promise of startups like Rabbit, which says that LAMs are a new foundational model that understands and executes human intentions on computers. The large language model understands what you say, but the large action model gets things done. It is based on the notion that AI can understand your commands, use software on your behalf, and then produce the outcome you're looking for. Several aspects of AI will not be covered in this series, primarily because of my own vantage point, which is tax law. Also, by the time this series is released, I'm sure we're going to witness even more innovation in AI. To an extent, what matters is what AI isn't. At the moment, AI is not a taxable person. It is not a person, period. It is just a system, a machine, a platform, a network, whatever you want to call it. But it is not our equal in the eyes of the law. Yet, much like the appearance of the internet as a medium through which people started doing business and engaging in economically relevant activities, AI can also act as that interface, whether for tax authorities or taxpayers. Insofar as we become prompt engineers and masters of our own butlers, society will become a completely different thing compared to what it is today. If society has changed, then tax policy must either have changed, which is the ideal but unlikely scenario, or be poised to change. And that is the path I propose we traverse together. I want to loop you into the intricate, complex, and multifaceted questions of tax policy and application involving AI. So, to summarize, taxes are governmental charges on income or assets or services which are established by law and should reflect taxpayers' ability to pay if established in democratic systems. Taxes should also be linked to the viewpoints and beliefs of the constituencies that approve them, which is why, while most countries feature in their tax systems an income tax and a consumption tax and variants thereof, these are accompanied by several other types of taxes, depending on the appetite and narratives of political actors in each jurisdiction. As a technological innovation and a growing part of human lives and activities and transactions, artificial intelligence is naturally relevant for taxation. It is defined as a system's ability to correctly interpret data, learn from it, and use those learnings to achieve specific goals through flexible adaptation. The sort of AI we interact with the most today is what is known as generative AI, the chief example of which is a large language model like ChatGPT or Bing Copilot or Gemini or Omni, among others, and the apparent evolution of LLMs is the emergence of large action models that essentially convert natural language processing into action, with AI operating different types of software on our behalf. To wrap up this episode, I would like to share with you a few images that I produced using a very popular AI system today, Midjourney. Midjourney describes itself as an independent research lab exploring new mediums of thought and expanding the imaginative powers of the human species. In simpler terms, it is AI that allows you to describe in words an image that you would like to see in front of you. Midjourney reads your text prompt and uses a diffusion model to unblur the image it describes from a noisy background. All of the images you see on the screen are the result of prompts submitted to Midjourney referencing the terms tax and AI. I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.